Welcome to Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast with Melissa Torto.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast with Melissa Torto. Melissa's a Massachusetts surrogacy and assisted reproduction attorney who helps individuals, couples, and growing families navigate the legal process behind surrogacy, egg donation, and embryo donation. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today Melissa and I are exploring one of the most important parts of any surrogacy arrangement, understanding what intended parents can realistically control, what decisions ultimately belong to the surrogate, and how clear expectations help everyone move through the process together. It's a lot, and we're gonna get into it. Melissa, how are you doing?
I am doing well, thank you. Thanks, Sean. How are you doing?
I'm great. I feel like surrogacy is all around me lately, but what are some of the most common misconceptions that intended parents have about control during a surrogacy journey?
The control piece is definitely something that is a very common misconception, just broadly overall. A lot of times intended parents come into this process with the expectation that because the surrogate's going to be carrying their child, that they are really in the driver's seat for many decisions that happen during the pregnancy. And that is just, unfortunately, not true. And it really is, there's a balance between what the intended parents want because it is their baby, but also balancing those needs of the surrogate because it is her body at the end of the day.
Yeah, just as you were answering, it's like, oh yeah, like there's a person, independent person carrying a child and is going to need to make some decisions that work for her versus, the intended parents. So what kind of decisions and expectations are usually outlined in a surrogacy agreement before pregnancy begins?
So we always attempt to get everybody on the same page as far as what everyone expects in your normal pregnancy and delivery situation. What vaccines is the surrogate willing to obtain? Some surrogates don't want COVID. They don't want flu. They don't want RSV. They would feel more comfortable not being contractually required to have those vaccinations. So we always want to make sure, outlining what is the expectation for those. Also, what's the expectation for prenatal testing? Is the surrogate open to all medically recommended or required testing? Or are they just, not comfortable with invasive procedures and just blood tests and ultrasounds? Are they comfortable with additional testing that may not be medically needed, but would give the intended parent some comfort? As well as, what sort of lifestyle restrictions are the intended parents, expecting the surrogate, to maintain throughout the pregnancy, diet, exercise, no drinking, no smoking. And then finally outlining, if there's specific circumstances that the parties, agree that they would terminate a pregnancy for.
Wow. As I said at the top, that's a lot.
There's a lot to think about, and that's why it's really important to be working with attorneys that specialize in this area of law, because your standard general practice attorney or your standard family law attorney is just not going to know how to really have those conversations and get down to some of the more nuances that are involved in this process.
This is sort of off the top of my head, Melissa, are most people going through this for the first time? Do you know what I mean? Or on both sides?
I certainly have, clients that are coming back for what we call sibling journeys, where they've had their first child via surrogacy and now are coming back to have a second one.
And in that context, are they using the same surrogate for the sibling?
Depends. Some come back with the same surrogate, if the circumstances align. Typically, a surrogate has to wait like at least 6 months to a year before she carries another pregnancy after she delivers.
Mhm.
So if intended parents really want to have children close in age, a lot of times they don't move forward with their previous
Same.
surrogate just because medically timing doesn't align.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the circumstance.
Fascinating. Wow. So now, super detailed agreement, right? I mean, like any contract, like you can write everything down. What decisions ultimately remain with the surrogate during a pregnancy?
Honestly, most of them do. In terms of we can put whatever we want into the contract, but at the end of the day, the surrogate does maintain that final control because she is the patient. The intended parents are not the patient when the surrogate is pregnant. The surrogate is the patient. And so doctors, specialists, nurses, ultrasound techs, they're all going to be looking to the surrogate. And it's important that the intended parents be there, have input, are consulted, let their feelings be known about certain things,
Hmm.
because it should be a collaborative effort. And that's what we really hope for. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the surrogate gets to decide, does she want that vaccine? Does she want to undergo that medical test? Does she want to terminate the pregnancy if there's a fetal abnormality? So a
Mm.
lot of these decisions do ultimately rest with the surrogate. And that's by law. Many
Yeah.
states have statutes that require that the surrogates not be restricted from making health and welfare
Mm.
decisions for themselves and the pregnancy.
Where does Massachusetts rank on the sort of scale of like pretty well buttoned down in terms of laws and, regulations, if you will, around surrogacy versus other states? Because I'm assuming there's a different, some states are like, what? Surrogacy?
Yes. There are some states that still don't have statutes on the books regulating surrogacy agreements. Ironically enough, Massachusetts was the last New England state to pass comprehensive legislation that deals with surrogacy. The
Interesting.
Massachusetts Parentage Act went into effect in January of 2025,
Oh,
and
wow.
that really outlines the enforceability of surrogacy contracts. So we finally have a parentage statute, but surprisingly, we were the last New England state to get one.
Well, hopefully they got it right and learned from some of the other
Yeah.
states that have already forged that path. What about communication expectations? How are those handled between the intended parents and a surrogate throughout the process? Because are they often like geographically proximic, or sometimes not? Or
Yeah, I mentioned, in one of the first two episodes of the podcast, how communication is absolutely vital and crucial in this process. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, the more you communicate, the more your relationship is going to grow
yeah,
and the more you're going to trust your surrogate. Like it's a partnership. Your surrogate is carrying your baby. So you want to make sure that you at some level trust her to have that extensive responsibility. So the more you communicate, the more your trust grows. And then the more your trust grows, the more you're able to navigate those tough decisions in the process because you actually feel like you have a partner going through this journey with you. Your
mhm,
surrogate's not your employee. You just because she's getting a compensation does not mean, you can tell her what to do. And so
right,
crafting that communication is so important. And so the contracts do mention communication parameters when notice has to be given, that the surrogates have the, contractual obligation to be notifying intended parents of important things that are happening in the pregnancy,
mm,
when her medical appointments are, when she has medical testing, what are the results of that medical testing? Does
mhm,
she have a scheduled C-section or a scheduled induction? So the contract will outline those certain parameters, and then in the contracts that I draft, I have a weekly communication requirement. It is
mm,
important that you are maintaining, at the very least, weekly communication with your surrogate because you're correct. You could be on opposite ends of the country, opposite ends of the world. I have worked with intended parents from Europe and their surrogates in California.
wow.
That's quite a far reaching, broad expanse. And so keeping up with communication is just how you're going to have the most successful journey.
You'd mentioned you know various medical issues that can come up and decisions around that. Uh, when that happens, some medical situation comes up, and that can change, right, unexpectedly during a pregnancy. Like, okay, what are we going to do here? How do the agreements help prepare everyone for those possibilities, in advance? So, like, you hate to even think about it, I'm sure, but it kind of has to be like, these things happen. What are we going to do?
Right. Well, the contract tries to contemplate as much as possible, but was actually listening to some attorney on social media the other day who does contracts, and he said it perfectly, that it's a contract, not a crystal ball. I can't contemplate absolutely every single scenario and every single what if. So the contracts are typically drafted to be intentionally broad as far as what happens if there is a medical issue. If there is one, you will work together with the medical professionals to get the appropriate testing done, to discuss what the results of that test are, what the best next steps are. Do you need to see specialists, second and third opinions? Those are outlined in the contract, making sure medical testing is done. If further testing needs to be done, the surrogate agrees to undergo that testing.
Mm-hmm.
But the contract can't contemplate every single possible medical scenario in the books, nor is there a X, Y, and Z guidebook to how each scenario is outlined.
Yeah.
Really, the intention is, and if a medical decision happens, you all work together with the relevant medical professionals to move forward with a plan of action.
Got it. Now, I know, for obvious reasons, right? Intended parents are, emotionally invested, financially invested, way before the surrogate's even pregnant,
Absolutely.
How do you help clients approach the process with realistic expectations, while still, feeling informed and involved?
It's a balance for me. I talked about earlier, it's a balance in the process between, the intended parents' needs and the surrogate's needs. But it's also a balance for me when I'm counseling clients about what this contract can and cannot do. And also trying to get them to understand that what I'm saying to them is not because I'm not on their side or because I don't want them to have a successful journey.
Right.
Because I do. That's why I do give clients typically some tough love. If a client comes in and is like, well, what do you mean I can't force the surrogate to do X, Y, and Z things? When I have a client that comes in kind of in that headstrong space of, well, I am compensating her.
Yeah,
Isn't
I'm the boss here.
Right. Like, doesn't she have to listen to me? And at the end of the day, I have to be like, I hear you. And that is a concern that probably every single intended parent I've ever worked with on some level has. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that this is not like a purchase and sale of a house. We're dealing with human reproduction here. So you have a whole other person on the side of this, and you have to treat her as that, a person. So it's giving them tough love, but also acknowledging that I understand that it is difficult to lose that control or to not have any to begin with.
Yeah, you're tapping into all of your communication skills.
Yes.
In this situation, and you want to guarantee go buy a toaster, as the old joke says. But what about? I mean, this speaks to. I'm thinking about compatibility, right? You've got a high achieving, headstrong intended parent. I'm wondering, what role compatibility and certainly early communication might play in avoiding misunderstandings later in the process, on that journey.
Yes. And I think what's important from the start is to make sure that you're working with an agency. If you're going with an agency, a surrogacy agency that's going to match you with a surrogate, make sure you feel comfortable with the agency's parameters for how they screen their surrogates, how they match their surrogates and their intended parents. And then also, when you are being presented with surrogate candidates by that agency, take a real look at the profiles of the surrogates. Make sure that, her values align with yours. Make sure that her beliefs align with yours. I have intended parent clients that are not vaccine people. I'm not going to call them anti-vaxxers, but they are just not vaccine people, which is totally fine. Match with a surrogate that also feels the same way and vice versa. It's important to make sure that you are not in a desperate attempt to be matched with a surrogate right away, that you're missing that compatibility aspect. Every single match is not going to be perfect, but finding someone who shares the same values with you. If you want every single vaccine in the books, to use the vaccine example, there is a surrogate out there that is totally okay with getting all the vaccines that you want her to get. It's just making sure that you're doing your due diligence when you're seeing a candidate to make sure that those things are aligned. And then
Hmm.
also communication style.
Yeah.
A lot of surrogates don't want to be micromanaged. So if
Really?
you're gonna come into this process, right? They're adult women, they don't want to be micromanaged. So if that's your kind of style, maybe not match with a surrogate that's a little bit more laid back, or maybe that is what you want.
Or
To
maybe
maybe
not have a baby at all. No.
yeah. It's all about that balance. It's all about that balance of understanding what your needs are, and again, understanding that your surrogate is a human being and needs to be treated with the dignity of such.
Yeah. And I'm not that familiar with this process, but I'm assuming, of course, that there's an interview kind of like let's say, me and my partner, my spouse, we're looking for a surrogate, and that's you, Melissa. You've come to us through an agency, as you described, and are we having a little zoomy zoom to like feel each other out and vibe check and ask the questions, right? I mean, talk about like
Absolutely.
making sure the vibes are compatible, because that's a
Right.
lot of, I mean, and it's nuanced, right? You don't always know, and you wonder too, like a surrogate, like, oh, I really want to get matched with. I mean, that's another conversation, another pod in terms of motivation and
Yes.
you know what kind of
Put
person becomes a surrogate. You know what I mean? Like
right.
that's a special calling, if you will.
Yes,
And I'm
for
interested
sure.
in this. We've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to know, because I'm getting like I'm sure there's like nightmare stories, but but
We don't have to
let's
talk about those. We don't
no,
have to
no,
talk.
no, no. We're early in this process. We'll
Yeah.
get to some of that later. But I'm wondering, just because this is potentially fraught, and we're here to help people navigate and avoid the speed bumps, if you will. What helps the process feel smoother, be smoother, less overwhelming for everyone involved? Like, what are the top three tips if you're writing the book right now, and it's like, okay, make sure ABC, if nothing else. What would that be for people listening?
Yeah, make sure that, at the jump that you are working with reputable professionals in this field. There are thousands of surrogacy agencies that have popped up all over the country in the past decade, and they're all going to try to sell you on their brand of what,
Sure.
makes their secret sauce their secret sauce.
Yeah.
Try to really find that agency that fits what you are looking for. Don't just be, mesmerized by what they're selling. Actually take a hard look at their program to make sure that it fits what you're looking for in a partner for
Okay.
your journey. So I think finding the right professional partners are important. Same thing with attorneys, that can still go in like bucket number one,
Yeah.
is whether it's me or somebody else, or make sure that the attorneys that you're working with have knowledge in this field and have been doing it for at least enough time that they can understand some of the pitfalls
Yeah.
of this
Yeah.
process. So that's really number one. Number two is to kind of check your attitude and your perceived perceptions of how this process should go. The most successful journeys that I've seen are ones in which the intended parents from the outset know that they don't have control and come to me and say, we know there's only so much of this contract that's enforceable. We really hope none of these bad situations happen, but we're willing to work with our surrogate.
Yeah.
That attitude is absolutely key, because if
Yeah.
you come into this process with the expectation that you're in the driver's seat, it's just not going to go as well as you've hoped. And then number three, again, is finding, the surrogate that works well with you. You're never going to
Taking.
find the perfect surrogate, like the unicorn of surrogates. It's very hard to sort of meet that mythical
Yeah.
aspect, but finding that partner who
Yeah.
understands the importance of collaboration and communication, you're going to be setting yourselves up for success.
That's awesome. Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your enthusiasm, your point of view. I'm looking forward to future conversations. So
Yes, likewise.
that's it for today's episode of Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Melissa Torto and her work helping intended parents, surrogates, and donors navigate the legal side of family building, visit her website, lawofficeofmelissatorto.com. Thanks for listening, and as always, please leave us a review, share a link with someone in your world who's thinking about this process, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.